Welcome to Meet the CIO, a new career-oriented interview series presented by the IT Executives Council. My name is Lindsay Brown, Executive Director of the IT Executives Council, and today I'm very excited to present our latest Meet the CIO interview. In this series, we interview top IT executives from some of the most interesting companies and organizations in the world. These interviews provide our members and subscribers with invaluable firsthand insights as they focus on career tips, advice, and ultimately secrets to success. With that, there is no better time to introduce our esteemed panelist, Rohit Jain. Rohit is the CIO for Harvard Business School Alumni Association of Northern California, a seasoned investor, advisor, and mentor. He serves on several advisory boards, is a mentor at the Harvard Innovations Lab, and is a regular contributor to Forbes and has held leadership positions at IBM, Stanford University, and Upwork, where he played a key role in the company's very successful IPO. Currently, Rohit is also the Vice President of Technology Applications and Analytics at iRhythm, a Nasdaq-listed digital healthcare company that combines wearable biosensing technology with machine learning to diagnose cardiac arrhythmias. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'll let you share a little bit about your current role and background before we get to the Q&A today.
First of all, thank you very much for having me on this, Lindsay. I do really appreciate, and it's an honor to be here. What really got me started for this role or for my career in information technology, so just dating myself way back in time when we still had those large floppy disks and so on, one thing that was really critical for me was the ability to perform repetitive tasks at a faster pace. Yes, we used PCs those days, but it was still better than the human process. And that really embarked me into a programming role, which, like most of us, where we are in our career right now, come from a strong programming background and then a strong business background. And that really helped me push myself for a stronger role in the IT world. And information technology over a period of time has transformed really from being just plain core information and technology. It's really how we impact business now, day to day, both in the profit world and the non-profit world.
Yeah, that's great. So thanks for sharing that. I think that kind of touched on what inspired you to really pursue the career in information technology, right? And so you mentioned having more of an impact on business. If you want to expand on that a little bit more, what do you think are the roles and responsibilities of a CIO, and how has that changed over time?
Sure. So take a step back. The role of a CIO did not really exist. I want to say maybe even 15 or 20 years ago. And that's way before the time of even a analytics role was created, or a CDAO as it's called now. So the role has really evolved over a period of time. And one thing that's very, very critical to understand is the role as it's evolved and the nuances that has come in from the role of a CIO. The CIO was, take a step back and say 10 years ago, you did not have a CISO explicitly carved out. A CISO was typically rolled under the CIO. And then in the past, maybe during the pandemic or just coming out of the pandemic, you've got a chief digital officer, you've got a chief data analytics officer, and all of these subshoots of a CIO that have carved out. So the role of a CIO first did not exist, and then when it existed was all-encompassing, and now it's become more of a hub with all these little offshoots that have been carved out of a CIO. And when you think of that, the role of a CIO, which kind of goes to the next part, which is the responsibilities of a CIO. The digital onslaught starting from the pandemic time, where working from home, which was pretty much something looked down upon, became a norm, and the CIO suddenly came to the forefront as being able to provide for the larger businesses as well as for employees and customers and vendors and so on, becoming the hub where CIO really had to say, what do we do to make businesses easier? And I'll use the word business, whether it's for profit, non-profit, doesn't matter. but
Sure.
being able to be the glue for transforming how work happens. So at that time, it was called future of work, and now you've got ChatGPT and so on. Doesn't matter. The CIO really has to be able to say, I'm here to help work become easier. And that's really the responsibility of a CIO.
Yeah, that's great. Lots of changes, especially born out of the pandemic, right? New job titles,
Yeah,
new roles, new responsibilities.
exactly. Because pre-pandemic, or maybe take goes to say, when the economic meltdown happened, as an example. When the economic meltdown happened, the CIO was really responsible for the network, for how
Hmm.
reporting happened, and so on. That's the role of a CIO at that time. And then meltdown happened, new jobs got created, a analytics role was created immediately after that, and that's how the role really transformed, right? So, and then what was the next big transformation event for mankind and humankind was the pandemic. So at that time, the CIO, who in all honesty did not even really read the contracts before the pandemic, none of us read the contract and said, uh, force the measure or an event that will stop us. But now a CIO really needs to understand legal contracts, needs to understand taxation contracts, because people are working all over the world. So a CIO really doesn't just provide for information technology, but now provides for everything that happens in a business.
Yeah, great insight. Now, given your background, I'm excited for this answer. What do you think is the most interesting technology project you have worked on?
Lots of them, but I think the biggest one is the ability to transform on the fly when the pandemic started. So I'll paint the picture. This is March 2020, or first couple of weeks of March 2020. And we're all working. We're reading about something called COVID happening somewhere in the world. And then, at least in California, I think I still remember it was 12th of March, and a lockdown was introduced. And now everyone goes
Mm-hmm.
home. And what do we do? How do we work? Sure, people have connectivity, but do they have bandwidth? And everyone's working from home, right? Vendors, how are my service providers going to support me because their staff is working from home, and so on and so forth. So I think that was the most interesting moment in time for me in pivoting on the fly of not only how do I support the business, how do I support myself, how do I support my family, because as leaders, we've got to take care of ourselves, of our loved ones, of our businesses, of our vendors, and so on. So, and we didn't have the luxury of time to go back and forth and saying, let's experiment with this, put it work, let's get a set of requirements. There were no requirements. And I think that was the most interesting technology project, if you want to so call it, in saying, there wasn't a fixed time, but there were no requirements, there were no laws. We had no inventory. We had people who had to be onboarded because we had offer letters out. And
Mm-hmm.
how do we get laptops to them? So, really, that was my most interesting technology project. Now that I think of it, is I had pretty much, I want to say, 5 business days, including nights and weekends, is
Wow.
to set up a North Star and say, this is how we are going to scale up. This is how we are going to support our business users, and we are going to secure inventory, uh, and we are going to work with the legal teams in ensuring data privacy is in place. Because in my previous role at that time, I dealt with a lot of PHI data. And now, if people are working from home, what happens to their health records? Is that legal?
Mm.
What happens if my spouse sees that? And so on. So, work with legal, set up roles and access sequences, working with the chief information security officer at that time, and crafting policies, implementing tools, everything, pretty much working around the clock while we are taking care of ourselves and our loved ones and their families as well. I think that was the most interesting technology project. I hope I don't get to work on such a thing again. I don't want another pandemic
I
in our
hope not.
lifetime. I hope not, and I'm sure it would resonate with almost everyone in the information technology field.
Oh yeah, I bet that resonated with a lot of people watching, especially the really the unknown, right? 5 business days to to get things up and running. It's just a crazy time. So it's very interesting.
Yep.
All right. Now, what would you say have been the most significant keys to your success?
Two things. I would say one is my family, in order to be able to support me while I go to unknown things. I think they are very critical for that. And then I think is my network. And my network doesn't include the people who work within my team, but also the people that I uh, used to work with, or I sometimes call up and saying, "Hey, I'm facing this type of a issue," and fill in the issue, right?
Hmm.
I think that's very critical for everyone to be able to have a very strong network that we can rely on. And the way I would say the network really gets built is, and I see this happen so many times, it's not one generation specific, that they say, okay, I belong to network X and I can get the following things off that network. And I think that's a very wrong starting point. We have to invest in the network, give a lot to that network. Only then can you expect something back from that network. If you give an X, you get X plus one back. But if you don't give an X, but you want one back, you're not getting it back. And I think that's very critical for me is my formal and informal networks where I've devoted a lot of time. I've supported a lot of things. Uh, for example, the Harvard Innovation Lab, where it's a pro bono
Hmm.
thing, but it calls for a lot of energies from my side to give back to my Harvard community if I want something back. So the network is very critical for me and is a very significant key to my success.
Yeah, that's great. And we certainly hear about networking quite a bit, but I love the point about investing in your network, right? Putting something into it to get something out. So that's awesome advice. All right. Now, are there any tools or solutions that help you be more effective in your role?
Uh, you know, tools and solutions, I keep saying this, they've got the shelf life of a banana. And the reason I
That's
say
good.
that, the reason I say that is, if someone would have said, there's this AI thing, I would have talked about this AI thing before November 18th, 2022. Oh, AI has been there forever. It's not transformative, but let's talk about metaverse because everyone was on the metaverse bandwagon, right? And 6 months before that, everyone was on the Bitcoin bandwagon and so on and so forth. But then, Chat GPT came, and since then, everyone's been on the Chat GPT bandwagon. So I really think solutions and tools that they come and go, really. I think one thing that's really consistent for me is a tool that I call EQ. Uh, that's irrespective of the technology. It's being having a very strong emotional quotient, and that's a tool that I rely on. Is to for me to have the empathy to think like my team members, to think like my stakeholders, to think like my vendor. When I'm getting into a contract negotiation with a vendor, I'm saying, hey, I want it for free, but can I really get it for free? Because they are in the act of making money like me. So I think having a strong EQ is a tool that everyone, specifically in a leadership position, needs to develop, and it comes over a period of time. It's not a technology like ChatGPT or metaverse that comes and goes, EQ is a very strong keystone, I would almost say, or a bedrock that we need to build our leadership careers on.
Yeah, that's great. Lots of buzzwords. So I think the EQ could stand the test of time, right?
Exactly, because today people will say, "Oh, all right, I'm using ChatGPT to perform X things, and that's
Hmm.
making me more effective." Uh, what happens to data privacy when you're using ChatGPT, right? Things like that. So you can always find a challenge in a technology tool that one may use, but these core personal skills that we put to use and we leverage over a period of time, they've stood a test of time over and over for centuries, right? Meditation is an example that I've
Hmm.
personally seen it transform the way I operate with. Uh, Getting those 15 minutes, 30 minutes at the start of the day, centers me for the onslaught of unknowns that may come my way. So if I was to take a step back and say, do I use a technology tool to make me more effective? The answer is no. Do I use tools that are non-technology effective, or that make me more effective? Yes, I do.
That's great because we often hear about the technology tools. So I like some of the non-technology tools as well.
Yeah, exactly.
All
So I was
right, and
having this conversation. Sorry, I was having this conversation the other day with a fellow CIO, and I was asking him, "What do
Mhm.
you use? What's the tool that you've been using?" And he went on the most frequently used apps, and I said, "Okay, you've got five most frequently. Which is the most frequently used one?"
Mhm.
It said Headspace. I said, "Okay, yeah, that's a tool, but what are you really doing with the tool? You're meditating. So meditation is your tool.
Mm.
Headspace is a means to an end. It's not the end. Meditation is the end." And he's like, "Ooh, that's pretty smart." I'm like, "Yeah. So don't use
I like
technology
that.
to get to the end. Don't use technology to get to
Mhm.
that end. Meditation is your tool, really, right? So think of that as the tool that's helping you get more effective."
All right, that's great. Now we've gotten tons of great advice so far, but if you had to sum it up, what do you think? What advice would you give to others that seek a career as a CIO?
One thing is always critical is understand business. And business could be whatever. And I take that and I give that more from a personal example because I grew up writing device drivers. Cannot get more geeky than that when you're writing device drivers. And I'm dating myself, writing device drivers for printer ports. That was my job, my first job, right? When you had printer ports and you had to write device drivers for that. But then over a period of time, I really started to understand that technology and a role in the technology field, if I have to scale up there, I have real two paths. One is to be a super deep architect where I'm really writing and creating technologies, or is to go the other path where I'm working with the business owners and understanding businesses and providing solutions for that, and which kind of leads into a CIO path. And if you've got to go down the CIO path, you've got to be able to have a meaningful conversation about businesses. Every business is different. I do understand that and I do appreciate that. But to be able to have a business level conversation and then using technology as a lever to get to that solution is what would help me be successful as a CIO. So, therefore, really, the advice would be understand businesses, and then if you get down a leadership path, always think in how can you have a meaningful impact in people's lives. That is very, very critical. And having a meaningful impact in people's lives doesn't happen as a part of your meeting. It happens as a part of your DNA where you're always thinking in how can I make people's lives easier every day, including nights and weekends. That's what really you've got to anchor your thoughts on.
That's great. So more meaningful conversations about business, but technology is the lever. That's great. All right. Well, let's see. That wraps us up here for today. So thank you so much for sharing these insights with our viewers. If you found today's session valuable, please be sure to visit our website to see a list of upcoming interviews. And if you are interested in participating, feel free to visit the URL on your screen, itexecutivescouncil.org/meet-the-CIO. Thanks again for your time, and great success to you, Rohit, and all of our viewers in 2023 and beyond.
Thank you very much. Honored to be with you.